So Helen, two different but kind of equally great presentations there, and you're going to talk about how you can take ideas and spread them and kind of build a movement of change. Is that?
I am. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the presentation so far, and actually I just want to thank you, because actually you've set me up beautifully for, not you, Tom. Obviously, I'm always thanking you, but thank you particularly to our first presentation, because it's given me lots of examples of what I'm talking about this afternoon. So we've got a little bit less time, so we may not be able to do the interactive stuff that I was planning. Oh, can we share my slides, please, Saika?
Sorry, I'm just having some technical issues. I'm trying to get your slides up. Just give me one moment.
Okay, well, I'll keep talking. So, so first of all, to say that this really is a little bit of a taster about how you do large-scale change. So when I'm not doing my job with as national advisor, one of the things that I'm involved in the southwest of England is something called a Spread Academy, where we work with an institution called the Billions Institute from the States. And we teach leaders across health and social care how to make large-scale change. And this course runs over 4 days. So in 20 minutes, you're just going to get a tiny little taster. And it's just really to promote a little bit of curiosity about how you do things. And what I will say, it's a bit like all quality improvement, actually. None of it is rocket science. That's lovely. I think I might have sent you the wrong slide set, but it doesn't matter. We might just have to skip through some. Yes, so it'll just give you a little bit of taster. And what I'm talking about when I'm talking about scaling up is when you have a project that has been working really well somewhere, it's spreading it up somewhere else. So you have to have a project that's working well somewhere before you start thinking about scaling it up. And if you haven't got anything, if whatever you're doing isn't working well, don't try and move it anywhere else. One of our problems, I think, across health and social care is we have people who come together and have an idea about something and do an amazing piece of work and get something going in their small area. But it is much, much more challenging to get other people to pick up that idea and make it work in their own areas. So what I'm hoping to do is to give you some top tips for sorting that out. Okay, let's go to the first slide. So I make no apology, this is one of my, you're going to see 2 of my favourite slides next. Some of you will have seen them before. So what we need to do firstly is develop the right mindset. We spend a lot of time trying to get people to do what we want them to do. It's a bad question. How can we get all these people to do what we want to do? The next slide will show the good question. And the good question is, how can I help all those people to do what they want to do? And the next slide, which I don't normally show, don't move on yet, Psycho. The next slide for this, I've stolen these from the Billions Institute. The next slide says, in order that we can unleash them and unleash a movement of people all moving in a desired direction. And I was so struck when I was listening to Kath and Chris' presentation earlier, that actually that's exactly what they've done. So they've got a ton of people who are desperately keen. They want to, they're coming up to them and saying, can I do some painting for you? Can I distribute your leaflets? So the piece of work that they have done is really awe-inspiring, and they're not forcing anybody to do anything. They've got people rushing over to them to say, how can I help? How can I help on your really important message? Okay, next slide. So this is one of my favourite quotes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about feeling, but I love this quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I just wanted people to just spend 20 seconds in a second thinking about something, a piece of change that you've made, either in your personal home lives or at work, and what made you want to do it. And I'll just give you a quick example of what I mean. So I'm a forensic psychiatrist by background, as some of you already know. So I work with a lot of people who are admitted into services because they have problems with violence. And so restraint is not an unusual occurrence in my service. And I always thought I was pretty good at sort of looking after people and all that kind of stuff. And then I heard a chap called Brendan Stone, who's a prof up in Sheffield, talk about his experiences of being restrained as a young person and the impact that had on him personally, on his engagement in services, and the impact on his life. And it made a really lasting impression on me. And it immediately, I thought to myself, I've got to change. I have got to approach this problem in supporting the people I support in a very different way. Because I cannot afford for people to walk away from services. I cannot afford for people to not think we're the people to come to. And so it completely changed my practice over time. So I do everything I possibly can, get quite creative about how we avoid ever restraining people. And if I ever find myself in a position where we do have to restrain as a team, we make sure we manage that really well during and post. So it's that, and that was all about the feeling that Brendan gave me, the absolute feeling I felt in myself when I heard him talk. Just spend a couple of seconds thinking about, is there anything that you've noticed in work that you've been doing at home or at work about change, where the feeling was important? And if anybody wants to chat anything into the box, please do. I can see the chat box actually, but just give you just a few seconds to write anything in. And what I might do is just carry on actually, Psycho. Next slide, please. So yeah, so people will have heard me say before that we are under the false impression that people analyze, i.e. look at loads of data, think and then change. But actually that's not how people work. People in general feel, think and change. And so it's not that data is not important. Data is very important, but we need enough data to confirm what we're saying and also data to help us move forward. So if you want to spark change, feeling is your fuel. Find the feeling and then show visible progress. And this really aligns to what Nav was asked, the question he asked Kath and Chris earlier around, so they've clearly got the feeling and got things really moving. And the next bit to make things even better is to be able to show that you're making visible progress. So that's the measurement bit, that's the data bit. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things today. I'm going to talk about adoption theory, a little bit about that to help you, give you a bit of a framework really to think about how you might scale some stuff up. And the second thing I'm going to do is share a little bit of a toolkit with the sorts of things you need to think about in each stage of spread. So everybody's going to be familiar with this, I suspect. So adoption theory, Rogers, adoption theory, the fusion of adoption is actually a very thick but quite interesting book. And this is the curve, the U-shaped curve that most people will have seen before. So this is looking at population of people, and people within a population can be in different places for different projects. And I'll give you a little example of that, what I mean in a second. So we've got a few people, 2.5% of the population are innovators. They're all people with loads of busy ideas, always testing and trying something new. And for our purposes, we can probably just put them to one side for a moment. We're really interested when we're thinking about our own change products in the early adopters. So the early adopters are the sorts of people that if you say to them, I've got this idea about X, Y, or Z, and would you mind giving me a bit of a hand and give it a little bit of test and see what you think about it? And they're the people, there's something about using this adoption curve that helps you to map out how you want to engage with people, because you can't engage with everybody all at once. So if you do a little bit of thinking about who you think might be where, and you can probably only do the first bit of this to start with, pick up your early adopters and get them testing and trying. You can then use your early adopters to be the ambassadors for your project going forward. Sometimes it's quite hard moving into a room where people are perhaps not so interested in your project or haven't heard of you before. However, your early adopters can quite often be you're much better advocates than you can be yourself with the project, because they've actually taken what you've done and they've fiddled about with it a bit themselves and they've tried it and been successful. And then, of course, you move on once you've got your early adopters, your early majority, so much and so forth. But actually, that is just a really useful way of trying to split up the sorts of people that you're trying to get involved and interested in the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. The other thing that's incredibly important to think about if you want people to pick up what you're doing, to spread what you're doing, scale it up, is making something as adaptable as you possibly can. If you have something that can only be done absolutely and rigidly in the way that you describe, people will simply not pick it up. People need to make something a bit of their own. It's a bit like I spoke about at the beginning. It's easy to do your own project. People are kind of a bit less interested when you want them to take your project and do something different and scale it up in their own space. So if you can make it as adaptable as possible, and so people can make it their own, you're much more likely to get things happening. So there are 5 attributes that will, 5 things you can think about that will help you with your scale up. The first is it must have a relative advantage to whatever you're doing at the moment. Because if it doesn't, if it has the same outcome, which most of the things you're trying to do here wouldn't have, we hope, then nobody's going to do it. It's got to be compatible with what people are currently doing, how people are currently working. Simple. Make it easy to try and easy to do. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good it is, it's just not going to spread. Make it trialable. So make it so that people don't have to do it all at once, but they can have a bit of a fiddle, a bit of a try. And the next bit is observable. So when they do things, they can see visible change. And we talked a little bit about that before. Okay, next slide. So this is expanding your impact, and this is just talking about some of the levers that you can think about for the change that you're doing. And this is where I'll try and reference back to some of the work that we heard about this morning. So next slide, Tiger. So yes, so here today with a little project that you've got going in a little area that you want to spread up across your geography, across your STP, across a nation. So there are 3 areas that you can think about working in. Now, we were going to spend a little bit of time looking at these and getting people to try these out, but we don't have time to do that. So I'm going to just quickly go through them and share a little bit of information. So before you do anything, you need to raise awareness. And there are lots of ways of raising awareness, as you can see, and that's not an exhaustive list. Publications, trainings, conferences, websites, apps, earned media. So again, I was thinking about Kath and Chris's presentation. Earned media stuff where you get yourself on the news, get to a place where people are asking you to come and talk about things. Social media, everybody knows about. Thunderclaps, that's where a lot of people all at the same time post something on social media about something you're trying to spread. Meetups, podcasts, editorial, speech, MOOCs, which are, I'm going to always get this wrong, so I've written it down so that I don't forget. A massive open online course, often free, is a possibility. Blogs, literature drops. I'm just again thinking about the work that we heard this morning, and that a massive literature drop around the leaflets that people pull together and canvassing. So that will all help you raise awareness, because people need to be aware of your project before they can be willing to participate. So when you're creating will, so there's I've got a long list of those again about the importance of relationships. I was very struck by the network that we heard about this morning, and the importance of a formal and informal networks to really get things moving. Stories, yeah. So I think it's interesting thinking about today's presentations and everybody's talks actually about how prominently stories featured. So when Nav was talking about risk assessment, he talked about BB. Now I heard the podcast, and Nav told us a little bit about BB's story, but actually that was incredibly engaging. And when you hear that somebody's been saying something, possibly something you might not have expected, you really want to hear about it. And I think one of the things that's hugely advantageous for us in the work that we're doing in reducing suicide is the number of people with lived experience who are really desperate to help us to combat this problem. And I think we heard about the mum in the Northeast who had lost her son to suicide, and the energy that she was putting in to changing things. And this, I think, isn't true in all of the areas. So one of the most powerful things we have around engagement and creating will is the power of our people stories. And they will be miles more powerful than any of us as professionals can put forward. Now, you have to be a little bit careful. We've made some stunning mistakes with stories in the past, but there are two good reasons to have stories in this work. The first is to highlight a problem. So somebody coming and telling their story, that's an appropriate place in their bereavement to come and tell a story, to engage. And the second reason is to show what's possible. So you will all have incredible stories of how somebody with lived experience, or professionals, have seen a problem or been made aware of a problem and then have got on and sorted that problem out, or are on the way to sorting that problem out. And that story inspires people to think there's hope, and actually they can make a difference. So thinking about how you use your stories is important. And you'll notice at the bottom there's some slightly unusual things: regulation, punishment, discontent. So it is interesting. I mean, one of the most important areas where we've reduced suicide is within inpatient services with non-collapsible rails. Now that is part of regulation, and it's amazing how a little bit of regulation can help with some areas. Obviously, we're very keen to get people to want to do things, and that does, for a slightly different reason, get people to want to do things. The last bit that I'm going to talk about is behavioural change. So you're involved in one of the behavioural change methodologies, and that's you're part of this collaborative. So a collaborative, this is a variation on a breakthrough collaborative. This is one way of bringing people together, but there are lots of others. And I was trying to pick up the sorts of things, some things that are being talked about today. So we can't go into great detail about these today, but one of the things that I picked up from this morning's earlier presentation is the network riding. So I was just thinking to myself, if I really wanted to spread something quickly in the Northeast, I'll be up on Kath's network and riding that network across all her connections to get things publicised very, very quickly. So always looking for networks in your area is tremendously helpful. The other things that you can do are, what are the other interesting ones? 90-day projects, having a very firm project where people are concentrating their efforts over 90 days is useful, and even more concentrated would be do something like a sprint that happens over a smaller period of time. Now, we don't have time to talk about it, but what I would say is I will put a reference into the chat up for a paper called The Many Ways to Many, which is in the Stanford Social Review, written by Joe McCannon, who was involved in the 100,000 Lives at the IHI. He's part of the Billions Institute. And that talks about all these different methodologies in a lot more detail. And I'm aware of time, so I'm going to stop and ask any questions.
Thank you, Helen. There was some really interesting. Sorry, I ran out of time. There's some quite interesting comments in the chat there about. So one about sometimes in statutory services, systems and processes get in the way of things rather than enhancing spread and adoption. And I think one as well about the convincing a laggard. Pleasant thing to be after you've engaged with early adopters can help convincing the late majority. So sometimes the converts can be the biggest zealots, I guess. That's part of that.
That's really true. One of the things I would say is you just have to be a little bit careful around that. So laggards are useful in a couple of ways, in exactly the way you described, Tom. And the other thing is they'll tell you how everything could possibly go wrong with what you're trying to do, and that's very useful. But one needs to be a bit careful that you don't spend too much time on your laggards and spend your time on your early majority and the next stage along. But I absolutely, if you can get a laggard to be your best mate, that would be fantastic.
Okay, Helen, we've reached 3 o'clock. Thank you so much to you, and also to Catherine and Chris and Tim and Megan and Nav, who's not here anymore, and well, not in the meeting anymore, hopefully he's still here, and Nick and his team at Enkish, and also